Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Joe and Kat Chats. Oh my goodness, it's the first episode of 2021. We're talking this year, 2021, and the future moving forward. I'm excited to get into this. It's going to be a whole lot of stuff that we want to get to, but first, in true form, how are you, Joe?
You know what? I'm looking forward to a better year than last year. I'm looking forward to upward mobility, continued health, and hopefully a bright light at the end of this dark tunnel that we've all been living in for the past 9 or 10 months or a year, or maybe a bit longer, depending on your economic situation. Kat, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Looking forward to the same things. The COVID numbers are getting worse and worse here in Canada, so it's a bit concerning. So I do encourage everyone to stay at home and don't contact anyone. If you have to go out, wear your mask, wash your hands, all the things that you've been hearing for the last several months still apply, because we need to, again, just like band together, and we need to figure this out, because the vaccine is not our savior, as some people have thought previously. So
yeah, the vaccine's not our savior, and there's definitely going to be some inequalities with regards to vaccine distribution. We've discussed that in a couple of previous episodes last year, and I love saying last year when last year was a week ago, but it technically was last year. But we talked about that, and we're going to probably see more of that. And we might get into that a little bit when we talk about today's episode, which is the future moving forward. We're going to rub the crystal keg and see what's on tap. And we're going to go over a bunch of different topics on a bunch of different areas in which we think, you know what, yeah, this is probably going to happen in 2021. There's going to be more of this in 2021. Or, you know what, yeah, we might see less of this in 2021 based upon 2020 and other situational and life factors that affect day-to-day existence. So, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, well, one thing I'm looking forward to more of, because it's necessary, is rallies and protests. And I know that you attended one this past weekend, and I wanted to just ask you how that went.
I did. I was at the Force the Vote rallies in Washington, D.C. It was at the Spirit of Justice Park in southeastern Washington, D.C., about a 5-minute walk from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. There were the same people who organized the Force the Vote rallies were also organizing vigils for Julian Assange in front of the United Kingdom's embassy. I couldn't attend those because, quite honestly, when I got to the Saturday event, it was just far, and I was done a lot of driving the day before. And then Sunday, I had to drive back to North Carolina. And where the Assange rallies were taking place was basically diagonally across town from Washington, D.C. It was way up north. And to give you an idea, geographically speaking, the UK embassy is across the street from the vice president's house. So the vice president has his, or now in about a couple of weeks, her own house. And then the White House is where the president lives. The UK embassy is literally across the street from it. But the Force the Vote rallies were set up to force progressive members of the House of Representatives into withholding their vote for Nancy Pelosi's speakership until Medicare-For-All gets presented on the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote, a floor vote. This idea of having a floor vote for Medicare-For-All has been something that Nancy Pelosi has campaigned for back when she first became a member of Congress, I think back in the late 80s, 1987, 1988. She said, you know what, we need a floor vote for Medicare-For-All. Many of the progressives like an Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal and Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Mondaire Jones, these are all progressive members. Mark Pocan, who's the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They've all said, you know what, we need a floor vote for Medicare-For-All. Ro Khanna, it's like, yeah, you know what, we need a floor vote for Medicare-For-All. And then on Sunday, when it was time to actually withhold their vote for Medicare-For-All, none of them did it. They all voted for Nancy Pelosi's speakership. And Nancy Pelosi will now be Speaker of the House again for another 2 years. And there's no sort of concessions that we know about that were made with the progressive members of the House of Representatives to force Nancy Pelosi into at least considering a floor vote for Medicare-For-All. So a bunch of us were protesting We were giving speeches. We were talking about what we need to do. We're trying to rally and mobilize and galvanize as much as we can. The first day, there was about 30 of us. And of the 30 of us, I would say about 8 to 10 people there were independent journalists and had their own YouTube channels.
Wow.
Yeah, there were just as many people marching as there were with cameras walking around saying, "Hey, I'm Frank from Frank Analysis," or "I'm John with Status Quo," or "I'm Jackson Hinkle with the Deep Dive," or oh gosh, who else was there? Nick Brana, who is the head of the Movement for a People's Party. He was there. Brianna Joy Gray was there. Brianna Joy Gray was Bernie Sanders' communications director.
Okay. Yeah.
She was there, and she gave a wonderful speech. Lee Camp, who does the podcast, who does a TV show on RT, Redacted Tonight, does a couple of different podcasts. He lives in Washington, D.C. He came out, and he had a nice little speech. Savage Joy, she had a wonderful speech where she talked about how her vision has deteriorated over the past couple of years, and how the injections that she needs in her eyes are close to $1,200 a month. Now she can't afford them. Yeah, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when she started to speak. So there were a bunch of people there that from the YouTube independent media space. The next day, basically everybody that came out the day before was there also. But then Convo Couch was there. Nico House from Mikasa Sukasa was there. Christine Olivo, she is running for a congressional seat in Florida. I think it's Congressional Area 24, if I'm not mistaken. Christina Olivo, she was there. Really, really nice lady. I had a nice chat with her. We took a selfie. I'll post that up later on today.
Nice.
Yeah. The shea butter was definitely strong in that picture. I mean, she was well moisturized as I was also. So yeah, it was good all the way around. It was good to be around a community of people that are like, yeah, you know what? We're going to fight for Medicare for all because it's a human right.
Yeah, absolutely.
John from Status Quo was like, hey, Joe, you guys want to have a couple of questions? I answered some questions, and a bunch of people saw it. And I think a couple of people recognized me, even with the mask on, because I don't know, I guess it's just me. But yeah, it was good to be out there. And I hope this sort of direct action is not limited to just Washington, D.C. This sort of direct action needs to take place across the United States. And it also needs, and I would say it needs to take place in other countries, but guess what? Other countries already have healthcare. So y'all don't need to be out in the streets like, yo, look, I want healthcare, Canada. You don't need to be marching down Hastings Street in East Vancouver saying, hey, you know what, I need healthcare. Because everybody in Canada has healthcare. Or you don't need for now. Yeah. You don't need to be in Yonge Street in Toronto, and be like, yo, look, we need healthcare. Because everybody's got healthcare. You don't need to be watching around the campus of McGill University or Ryerson University or the University of Alberta or University of Winnipeg or anywhere, because everybody in Canada has healthcare. We in the United States do not have universal healthcare. So we got to put boots on the ground and feet in the streets and make it happen one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for all of that. I think that something that I just want to make really clear with this is, in all of these movements that we talk about, we go to rallies all the time. We do, social justice work. And, there are a lot of times when you feel discouraged and, the things that you're trying to do don't happen. And that's when you have to just take a step back and recalibrate and reconnect, I guess, with the other people that are, like-minded in the movement with you. And I love that you did connect with lots of people that were like-minded, and that really pushes a movement forward, whether you get the result now or you need to, rework, what you're pushing for in order to, change what you need to get the result you want. So yeah, that's a really nice thing that happened, I guess, that, you got to connect with other people and really, I guess, I don't know, connection is something we all are missing right now. So
yeah. And it's the kind of thing, it's the kind of situation, Kat, where we need to have people on the ground advance this message forward. And it's this type of situation where we've seen not only have the Republicans completely abandoned the American people, but we're now seeing a complete dereliction of duty by the Democrats. And at this point, there's a clear and present understanding now more than ever that we cannot rely on the Democrats to do anything for the general population. We are going to have to do it ourselves one way or another.
Absolutely.
And the more that we continue to try to placate these progressives in the House of Representatives because of their ability to have a blue check and have 10 million followers on Twitter, or they've got a really loaded Twitch channel, or they've got an interesting life story, or they're really good at cooking on YouTube. We don't care about any of that. What we care about is your ability to serve the people that you said you were going to serve, because you are a public servant. And if you're not going to do that, get the hell out. Yeah. We will either mobilize to get you to do what we want you to do based upon what you said you were going to do for us, or we will find other candidates that are going to do the will of the people, and we will primary your ass. As simple as that. This is not, oh, hey, you know what? I'm going to still buy your overpriced sweatshirts because I like you and because you speak Spanish just like, no, the hell with that. No.
Yeah. We're far past that.
We're way past that. The days of being nice to politicians and the days of speaking politely to our public servants, those days are gone. Because these same public servants sold us out for their own political gain and their own political careers.
And their own personal pocketbooks.
And their own personal pocketbooks, purses, and wallets. And satchels if you got a man bag. Because some dudes like to work with the man bag. But whatever it is. Whatever you got your money in, that's what they sold us out for. And they're willing to do that. So if they're willing to do that, we have to be equally as willing, if not more willing, to be as energetic and as vitriolic as they've been to us in terms of not giving us the populist policies that we need to advance America forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And that actually brings to mind one of the elections that's happening in one of the states today. I believe you said it was in Georgia.
It's in Georgia. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're going to talk about today, again, I don't have my headgear to look like I'm a Swami or anything. I don't have all that with me. I left that in Canada, unfortunately. But what I think we're going to see more of is a struggle for democracy in 2021. We're going to see more conflict, political conflict. And we've seen that in the 3 global issues episodes, how many elections have taken place globally. Yeah. But there were supposed to be even more elections taking place globally. But what happened is COVID-19. Yeah. COVID was like, let's hold this off until next year. The Olympics was supposed to happen this year, but they were like, hold on, let's wait on this. Let's let this one sit for a little bit. So one of the elections that's taking place is not a presidential election, but a senatorial race. And this is an important senatorial race in Georgia. And it's taking place right now as we are filming this episode on January 5, 2021. And now what we have is 2 senatorial seats up for what's called a special election. You have Reverend Raphael Warnock versus Kelly Loeffler in one senatorial race. And the other senatorial race is David Perdue versus Jon Ossoff. Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are the incumbent Republicans. Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff are the challenging Democrats. Now, why is this senatorial race so important? This senatorial race is so important because right now the Republicans hold a 52 to 48 seat majority in the Senate. 52 to 48 seat majority in the Senate. If the Democrats win, so the Democrats in Georgia being Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff, dethrone Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, that means there will be a 50-50 balance in the Senate. That will be a tie. You want, in this instance, for the sake of the Democratic Party, you want a tie. Why? Yeah. You want a tie because the Vice President of the United States, the newly elected Vice President of the United States, breaks the tie. That Vice President being Kamala Harris. So if Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock win these senatorial elections, the Senate becomes 50-50 Democrat, 50-50 Republican. Vice President breaks the tie. And then that means Mitch McConnell is no longer Senate Majority Leader. The current Senate Minority Leader out of New York State, a gentleman named Chuck Schumer, then becomes Senate Majority Leader. At that point, there seems to be more of a likelihood of more of Nancy Pelosi's agenda potentially being moved from the House into the Senate, being passed by the Senate, and reaching Joe Biden's desk and becoming law. Most notably, a stimulus package that actually helps working and needy Americans and $2,000 checks.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of the light dusting of whatever you got before, which was it was barely, it's like nothing. That's nothing.
And I just got mine was direct deposited. I just got mine over the weekend on Sunday. So I got mine 2 days ago. And it's mostly spent already because brothers got bills to pay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this has been challenging for most people, this pandemic, and my goodness, it's going to continue because the end is not anywhere near in sight yet.
It's not anywhere in sight. It's not anywhere in sight. Another struggle or stranglehold for democracy that we're seeing, and my friend Sophie Neiman, she's a wonderful journalist, and she's back in Baltimore, but she primarily covers African news. She covered Africa, and she lived in Uganda for a while. And right now, there's an election taking place versus the incumbent president, I think his name is Yoweri Museveni, versus a pop musician named Bobi Wine. I know we've mentioned Bobi Wine and Museveni several times in our previous conversations about global issues. The situation in Uganda is getting way out of control. They are shooting and jailing journalists. They are shooting several of Bobi Wine's security personnel. Museveni has gone ahead and said, hey, you know what? Because of COVID-19 restrictions, you can't rally no getting together, no rallies, no nothing. But when it's a rally for Museveni, people are allowed to rally for him. So that is a situation that bears keeping an eye on, because there's all sorts of violence that is taking place with that election. Museveni is dramatically trying to squash Bobi Wine's potential rise to power, in addition to the other candidates for the presidency of Uganda. So that bears taking a look at. Ethiopia's election also takes place this year. That was supposed to happen in 2020. Another election that I don't think people are keeping their eyes on is the South African election. Yes, South African's election. Now, South Africa's current president is a gentleman named Cyril Ramaphosa. He's been in office for a while. He is the 5th democratically elected president of South Africa since the end of apartheid.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, 5th one. And the first president after apartheid, obviously Madiba, Nelson Mandela. So his main competition is a gentleman named John Steenhuisen. John Steenhuisen. He's 44 years old. He's a member, I think, of a Democratic Liberal Party. He's also white.
Interesting. Okay.
He's also white. Every president that's been democratically elected since Nelson Mandela is black. Every one of them. Whether it's Mandela, whether it's Cyril Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa's predecessor was, what was the guy's name? Jacob Zuma. Okay. And I don't remember the two people after Mandela. I don't remember who they were, but I know they were black. So you now have a potential white guy who's my age, 44 years old, who could potentially be the president of South Africa and could be unseating the incumbent president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And a little side note, Cyril Ramaphosa is one of the wealthiest men in South Africa. He has a net worth of 450 million American dollars, which is worth a few billion South African rand.
Yeah, and it shows in his political choices. We've talked about that kind of thing too before, and how, the people who we are electing, if they are already rich or wealthy, I should say, make far different choices than folks that have experienced poverty before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is one of the greatest Bay Area rappers of all time. All right, we talk about Bay Area rappers from San Francisco, Oakland area. Obviously, the greatest of all time is Too Short. We lost another Bay Area rapper in MF Doom. Rest in peace, MF Doom. But another one of the great Bay Area rappers of all time is E40. Okay, and E40 a few years back had a song called Choices. And the hook from the song Choices says, everybody's got choices. I'm used to this money. I'm used to this bread. When you talk about being used to this money and being used to this bread, in reference to political candidates, money is certainly going to influence the way you govern.
Yeah. Yeah, it
And
absolutely does.
And again, if you have that kind of money in your checking and savings account and you're the leader of a government, your choices are going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, that's why there's no taxes for like the super rich people in Canada or the US, because they're the ones that get elected and they
Yes.
just make the rules for
Yes.
themselves.
It's the remix of the golden rule. Because the golden rule used to be, hey, treat others as you want to be treated. Now it's the new golden rule is he or she who has the gold makes the rules.
Yep, absolutely.
That's the new golden rule. And when we talk about these oligarchs that just control everything, we talk about the former Soviet Union, the Kyrgyzstan elections taking place. And again, not necessarily the most important election in terms of geopolitics, but in terms of just a story. If you remember this, and we talked about this, there was a resignation of Surumbai Jinpegov. He was like, you know what? Okay, everybody hates my guts. They're tired of me with this COVID-19 handling. Okay, I quit. I'm done. And then a gentleman named Sadir Japarov decided to say, hey, you know what? I declare myself president. I declare myself prime minister. Japarov was in jail for trying to kidnap and intimidate one of his political rivals, and they put him in jail. And then when the riots and protests took place, he got out, and then he was like, "Okay, yep, I'm taking over the country," and now he's trying to become president. Crazy story.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can talk about the moral compass of elected officials or people who maybe just are going to take it by force, because that sounds like that might be his inclination if he doesn't win. So yeah, that's definitely something to be watching.
It's definitely something to be watching.
Yeah,
it's definitely something to be watching. I mean, something that we haven't talked about, I think, ever in the history of the greatest podcast of all time, Joe and Cat Chats. We haven't talked about this yet, but something that is going to be of import because it was quite important with a couple of years back when Carles Puigdemont was arrested for trying to create a secession. Like, who is Carles Puigdemont? Well, Carles Puigdemont was the president of Catalonia, which is a semi-autonomous region in Spain. And Spain, Catalonia, is going to be electing a new parliament this year.
Okay. Yeah.
So that holds major significance, because think about how many different ways what the people in parliament could be like, you know what, we're out of here. Let's secede. Let's become our own country again. Let's really try and go for this. Puigdemont was good, but we didn't have enough leadership and enough people in the streets walking around Barcelona saying, hey, you know what? We want to be our own country. We're tired of carrying the rest of Spain. Madrid's good. Valladolid's all right. But look, we need to do something different. We need our own stuff, and we need to be our own country. So they might try that this year. Anything can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything can happen. Portugal is going to have their elections on January 24th, about 3 weeks from now. The Netherlands are going to elect new members of the House of Representatives on or about March 17th. March 17th is a special date as far as I'm concerned, because it is my birthday. It is also St. Patrick's Day, which also makes that the greatest day of all time on the calendar.
Amazing.
We're gonna set the record straight on that. So set the record straight on that. But something that we've talked about in our voting episode, we talked about it in the very first episode of the Joe and Cat Chat series, is, hey, you know what? We need to get money out of politics, but we also need to have more than 2 political parties. We need more than this duopoly just doesn't work. You know, in Canada, you have 4, maybe 5 political parties, but realistically, it's Liberals and NDP, or Conservatives and Liberals.
Yeah, Conservatives and Liberals are like the main ones that tend to get elected.
Yeah. And then NDP with Jagmeet Singh, and then the Greens. Oh, it's the black lady, and I can't remember her name. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, me neither.
Shit! It's not Elizabeth May. It's the new lady, and she's from from Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, and I can't remember her name.
I can't either.
I can't remember her name.
Yeah. Oh, We'll have to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and then obviously the Conservatives, I think, are Andrew Scheer, if I'm not mistaken.
He resigned. There's a new guy in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Trudeau is the Liberal.
Trudeau's the Liberal.
And then the Bloc Québécois is also like usually there, but usually that's very regional for Quebec.
Quebec, okay. Now, the Netherlands, not a big country. The Netherlands has 13 political parties, 13 recognized political parties. Okay?
Wow.
The People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, Party for Freedom, Christian Democratic Appeal, Democrats 66, Green Left, Socialist Party, Labour Party, Christian Union, Party for the Animals, which is a party specifically about animal rights, 50 Plus, which is for Party for Pensioners' Interests, the Reformed Political Party, which is essentially the Christian right, which is not much different than the evangelical Christians of the Republican Party in the United States. We have the DENK, D-E-N-K party, which is for identity politics. That's interesting. And the Forum for Democracy, which is National Conservatism Party. They would essentially be the Tea Party under the Obama administration, or essentially the farthest right-wing group of Trump supporters now in the current electoral body politic of the United States. But then there are other political parties that kind of want to get their hands in the cookie jar and get into the mix. The Pirate Party, which is for pirate politics. The BIJ1 Party for anti-racism. The Libertarian Party. The Code Orange Party. The Farmer Citizen Movement, which is focused on agrarianism. The Group Aten Party. The Henk Krol List, which is progressive conservatism. The JA21 Party, the NIDA Party, which is focused on Islamic democracy, the NL Better Party, which is about healthcare reform, and the Splinter Party, which is for progressive liberalism, and the Volt Netherlands Party, which is for European federalism. So there was another 11 or 12 parties that I just mentioned that kind of want to get in on this, in addition to the 13 political parties that are already looking to have that are jockeying for position in the Netherlands Parliament.
Wow. I mean, that's wild. I don't know how I would want to, or how that would work. I mean, choosing between like 4 or 5 parties is hard enough here in Canada, and my goodness, yeah, you'd have to really align with the folks that are running. And that, I mean, I think that's a great thing. That's what democracy is, and that's what it should be. Exactly. But there are definite pitfalls, I guess, and things that might challenge the system there. But I'm not as familiar with the system in the Netherlands, so I can't say that for sure.
I'm not overly familiar with all of these political parties. It just has the name of the party and their political leaning next to the political party. But I would think that I'm going to disagree with you respectfully on this, because I think having a whole bunch of parties is a good idea. I think especially having 13 political parties is an excellent idea, because you're more likely to get a representative electorate with the more choices that you have.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a relatively small population and you have a bunch of different parties jockeying for position. I think what this also does, when you have, for example, some of these parties that are left, and then some of them are center left, and some of them are just far left, where in a Condorcet system of voting, otherwise known as ranked choice voting, that would be a perfect situation for ranked choice voting. If they'd have ranked choice voting in the Netherlands, and I hope they would, especially with
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I think that it would make sense to have that many parties, because otherwise you would get the issues that arise in Canada, where you get a minority government, and then there's just like infighting all the time, and then nothing really gets done.
Yep. Yeah. But I would certainly think if you have ranked choice voting, you would then, obviously, the people who get the fewest votes will get thrown out, and you keep voting until you get a majority, 50% plus one vote. I would certainly think at that point you would have to create coalitions across different political parties. So at that point, you're going to get a better brand of political contest but you will also ultimately get a better brand of government and governance.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And yeah, I really hope that they have ranked choice voting, because that is the only way that I can think of that would actually allow that to work really well and be a lot more representative of like what the people believe and want, and
Yep.
all of those things. So
yeah, definitely would be. And especially when you have politics, and the really politics is you find people that you disagree with, not the ones you agree with, because the ones you agree with are going to ride with you anyway. You find people that you disagree with, you build some sort of consensus, you mainstream the consensus, and then you execute the consensus with policy.
right, exactly. Yeah.
That is politics 101. And I just explained what everybody in Congress should be doing now, and none of them seem to even want to do it. So if there's somebody in the Netherlands that wants me to be on their campaign,
Yeah, you're it. You're their guy.
I can learn a little Dutch. All right, I can learn a little Dutch. You get me one of those train cards so I can travel to and from work. I'm in, way in, way in, way in. And I know I mentioned trains and public transportation, and how there's a lot of different countries that are using more public transportation and reducing emissions and cars. I think green energy, environment, and climate change is going to be a big, 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 huge issue this year, 2021.
Yeah. Speaking of looking forward into the future, because I mean, it seems like the conversations I used to have pre-COVID kind of got put on pause as far as environmental issues and climate change stuff, because COVID was such a huge issue. And while it is related to all of the climate stuff and globalization, it's all related and interconnected. Climate change is still happening, whether there's a pandemic or not. And so I think that it is very important that we need to be talking about this. We need to be aware, and we need to push for policies that are actually going to change the way we live here in North America, particularly, and some other places. I mean, because it's absolutely those who are the wealthier nations that are causing like the most issues as far as greenhouse gases, consumption issues, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. And an event that was supposed to take place about 8 or 9 weeks ago, typically around Election Day in the United States, was the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland. It's also known as COP26. And Glasgow, Scotland, from personal experience, is a wonderful city. It's beautiful. If you drive about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Glasgow, Scotland, it is the greenest area that I've ever seen in my life. Just the Scottish countryside is amazing. Go a little further out, you're at Loch Lomond. You go a little bit further past that, you're at Loch Ness. Loch is the Scottish word for lake. So a little bit of history of Glasgow, Scotland. And Sauchiehall Street is where all the action is in downtown Glasgow. But that's another conversation for another time. But yeah, they were supposed to have the COP26 this year. And what they were going to do was look at the Paris Climate Agreement. And again, every 5 years, people that are participants in the Paris Climate Agreement are like, hey, you know what? We're going to ramp up our green initiatives. We're going to do more to save the environment. And they were supposed to do that this year, but it didn't happen because of COVID. So they postponed it. It's going to happen again this November. And we've seen this year some areas around the world renew their commitments to becoming carbon neutral or zero emission. For example, Europe looks to be net zero carbon emissions by 2050. China is looking to be carbon neutral by 2060. The USA is looking to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and they promise to be carbon neutral by 2050. And one of the initiatives I think Joe Biden is certainly going to do once he gets into the White House in a couple of weeks is he's going to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, because President Trump said, we don't like this. We don't like this Paris Climate Agreement. This is terrible. And I think one of the things that Joe Biden needs to do is also get rid of coal, because we said, oh yeah, clean coal. Donald Trump said, hey, we're going to have clean coal jobs. There's nothing clean about coal.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Walk into a coal mine, you're gonna look like the back of this phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
And it's still, oh my goodness, it's just aggravating. My home province of Alberta here in Canada, where I grew up, has a large proposal for mountaintop removal right now, and that is some really devastating stuff once you start. So we're hoping that will get denied, but the current premier of that province is a radical, right-leaning radical. So I don't have much hopefulness.
It makes you wonder clean coal, really?
Yeah, it's like clean diesel that Volkswagen tried to dupe us all into thinking that there was clean diesel. It's not true.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
But one thing I think that needs to be said when we're talking about the Paris Agreement is, we can agree. The UN has a lot of declarations that many countries agree to and then just vastly violate. And Canada is one of them. I can speak to that because I'm from here and I pay a bit of attention to that. The government bought a $4 billion pipeline that is in direct conflict with any climate change initiatives, any of them. And that thing is being built. So, so we need to hold our elected officials accountable for this stuff, not only just let them sign these agreements with the UN, because the UN is great for outlining stuff and creating these agreements. It's a great initiative, but there's no accountability at all. So.
Yep. In the UN, it's one thing for the UN to make a proposal. It's another thing to actually back it up with action. You can't just be like, okay, hey, we're going to put this out there and we hope you listen. And if you don't listen, then we might issue some sanctions that we really can't enforce.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
Yeah.
And
we talked about this in regard to the Declaration of Human Rights a few weeks ago too. And it's just like, there are many countries that have signed that declaration, but are clearly violating human rights all the time. And it's the same with the climate agreements.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think something we're going to see more of in 2021 is increased electric car production. Electric car production. Where I live, the area I'm living right now, I'm seeing more charging stations being built every couple of weeks. You go to a park, you're like, oh, there's a couple more charging stations. At the farmer's market that I attend maybe once or twice a month, there's certainly more electric vehicles. And not necessarily electric vehicles like a Tesla or a Chevy Volt, but I'm talking actual proper electric vehicles that people are riding, and they'll just charge them up, and they ride them specifically to ride kind of around town, around the neighborhood streets, not necessarily on the big highways and larger thoroughfares. So there's going to be more electric cars made. You're also going to see, I think, more electric batteries manufactured. Not necessarily just for cars like the Tesla, but we're also going to see home batteries being made, solar power being a situation. We talked about, I think part of the reason why Elon Musk is now the second richest person in the world is partially due to his batteries that are being made.
Which he sort of nudged the US government to set up a coup in Bolivia for.
We talked about
that before.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we talk about electric cars, I think we are going to see more. I think you're right. And that's an industry that's sort of up and coming. I don't know if that's a solution or a benefit to the climate change issue, because it really depends on how your electricity is made. Because if you're pulling a lot of power, you need the infrastructure. And in certain places in both of our countries now, electricity is made by burning coal still. And so when we're talking about, reducing coal, like electricity just perpetuates that. And so it's like a disconnect between, like, we think we're doing something good for the environment by getting an electric car or this, batteries that have materials made from mining in Bolivia. But it's a way to disconnect ourselves from the actual environmental devastation that these things are causing.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. And a bit further on that, again, where I live right now, a couple of the charging stations are right next to the town hall. And the charging stations at the top of the at right where that, there's a pavilion there. The pavilion is covered with solar powered energy, just solar panels. And I'm fairly certain that the solar panels provide enough energy for the 2 vehicle charging stations in that area.
Mm-hmm.
That makes some sort of reasonable sense.
Yeah, I agree.
That makes sense. Even though the solar panels are made with a little bit of crazy stuff that's not necessarily the most environmentally friendly, that is certainly better than burning coal to make a battery, to charge charge your car.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's always with the environmental crisis, it's really been about adapting and compromising a lot of times in the past. I wish we didn't have to do that, but industries are just gonna have to continue because we still live in the system that we do, which is capitalism. And yeah, I mean, we can get into a more nuanced conversation about this maybe on another day, which I think we're going to talk about environmental issues in an upcoming episode in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that, everybody. But it totally depends on how long the life cycle is of these, for example, a solar panel. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to weigh the carbon footprint of those. Mm-hmm. But again, that's if you want to comment, but we can save that more nuanced conversation for another week.
That's a whole other conversation. I mean, Norway is looking to ban gas cars by 2025. Norway. The UK will ban all new gas and diesel vehicles by 2030, end of this decade. France will ban the sale of gas and diesel cars by 2040. So there are initiatives that are already in place. And given the way this pandemic has completely changed the way many people around the world are living their lives, and the economic viability in order to maybe able to afford a car or not, you might have to look to some of these situations and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I can't afford a car. Maybe public transportation is the way to go. And on the flip side of all of these privately owned vehicles and cars that we're talking about, I certainly think if we're looking at private vehicles and reducing or eliminating emissions for private vehicles, we're going to just certainly have to do the same for public vehicles also.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Buses, commuter trains, commercial vehicles.
Yeah.
We'll have to look into those also, because it doesn't do a whole lot of good if you have a bunch of people driving Teslas and Chevy Volts around, but you still have an 18-wheel tractor trailer spewing out carbon monoxide fumes while driving on the highway. Got to look at those too.
Yeah, absolutely. And farming vehicles as well. I mean, we have a lot of farmland here in Canada and in the US, and there's, every farmer has all the equipment because they all have to harvest at the same time. So for the most part. So yeah, I mean, the agriculture industry is a very polluting industry, which we can also talk about another time.
Right. And you know what? I mean, maybe this isn't, I haven't seen anybody talk about this yet, but if Elon Musk is out here making cars and say, hey, you know what? We got these battery operated cars. They're good. All good. Great. Why is he working with somebody like John Deere?
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Think about, because realistically, the charges for these vehicles, these Teslas, are about 300 miles.
Yeah.
All right, 300 miles.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got a tractor trailer, I'm sorry, one of these farm
actual tractor,
an actual tractor, You're not driving 300 miles in that tractor.
No
matter how much acreage you're trying to cover. And bear in mind, 43,560 square feet is an acre. 640 acres is a square mile. If you own, let's say, let's say 10 square miles of property, that should be less than 300 miles that you're covering. And you probably won't even cover all that if you're taking care of all that land in one go. So you could probably do plow. If you ever watch any Western Wild West movies, they always say, "Hey, we're going to go to the South 40." The South 40 is a quadrant of area that refers to the 640 acres that makes up a square mile. It's also the 40 acres that black people were promised when we became emancipated. It's also the reason why Spike Lee decided to call his production company, 40 Acres and a Mule. So let's say you're dealing with a 40-acre plot of land. You could probably do that on a single charge.
Yeah. I mean, these are technologies that we have and we should be implementing. But again, it goes back to what our politicians are doing for us. Because if we did not have such strong lobbyists in the fossil fuel industry here in North America, in both of our countries, I think that these technologies would have been starting to have a major transition long ago, but we have those lobbies, so we've been unable to, let go of the past and move into a more, climate sustainable future as far as our technology.
Absolutely. And we talked about agriculture. So, we're going to plow this land. We're going to do this and do that. I think something we're going to see more of are plant-based diets. I think we're going to see more people ditching red meat and animals and becoming not necessarily not simply just vegan, but plant-based. I think we're going to return to a more holistic and homeopathic style of eating. We're going to get rid of we're going to reduce and potentially eliminate the need for large factory farming and large agriculture, getting rid of factory fishing. And we're going to go back to if you live in a particular area, we're going to go back to what's called the 100-mile diet. You kind of eat.
I don't know if that's a thing that we can count on for 2021, because these things move really slowly. And again, it goes back to the lobbying and the power of the agricultural industry that in politics. I mean, Canada just redid the food guide, I think last year or the year before, 2019, I think.
Right.
And they vastly reduced the amount of dairy and meat products that should be consumed. And they also vastly reduced the amount of grains, which is, I think, a really interesting point, because for many, many years, basically since my childhood, grains were supposed to be the foundation of your diet. But that was implemented because grains were what we grew in the prairies. And that was supplemented by the government. They have, it still is. And so that part of the diet is just what they thought they should promote, but that's not what's the most healthy for you.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And when we talked about grains and how a lot of grains are relatively inexpensive to grow, wheat, rice, etc. What we're also going to see that's, I think, directly tied into, or at least related to, agriculture and different types of crops, we're going to see an increase in wealth inequality. And I think we're also going to see an increase of migrants. We're going to see an increase in deportations. I think we're going to see an increase in evictions, residential evictions. I think we're going to see a lot of unused commercial property, because so many stores and other businesses have had to close as a result of this pandemic, and permanent closures. I think we're going to see lots of unused office space that was previously occupied, because so many people now are just working remotely, working from home. If you have a good enough internet connection and a laptop or a kitchen table that you can work from, you don't need to go to an office anymore, or at least not nearly as often. You can work remotely. So we're going to see more people working remotely. In addition to technology being the way forward, I think we're also going to see an increase in e-commerce, which ultimately means that Jeff Bezos is going to make even more money. And so is the Walton family, who owns Walmart. And the B-side to that record with an increase in e-commerce is an increase in the number of logistics companies that are going to be available, because so people are going to say, hey, you know what? I don't necessarily want to go to, let's say, Superstore and buy a bunch of stuff, or Canadian Tire for that camping gear. You know what? It's far. I'll just have it delivered. You might want Canada Post to deliver it, but Canada Post can be a little bit tricky at times. So you might want maybe a private logistics company to do it. You might want UPS to do it. What can Brown do for you? You might want them to show up. They pay a little bit more for it. Or there might be another logistics company that deals specifically with package handling based upon the province. That way you don't necessarily have to worry about potential quarantining rules going between different provinces. So British Columbia might just say, hey, you know what? We got our own logistics service and we deal just in British Columbia. So if you want to deliver anything from Salt Spring Island or Comox or Victoria all the way out to Fernie, we got you covered. And everything up north and south and in between, we'll take care of you. So they might have something like that set up. So logistics, and I think the other thing you're going to see more of is distance learning. Our educational system, we did an entire episode on education, COVID-19 and education. We talked about this. There's going to be more distance learning. And I think there's going to be ultimately some of the stuff that we talked about in our educational episode. We're going to talk about, I think what we're going to see more in 2021 is a shift in education. What I mean by a shift in education is what people are actually going to be learning is going to be different than what you were learning pre-pandemic, because there's going to be different societal needs as a result of COVID-19 that will force a different type of pedagogy in order to create a more viable workplace and a working space. So you're going to need more people in public health and allied health. You're going to need more people that know how to lay fiber optic cable to create more internet connections for the home. You're going to need more people that know how to know how to drive a truck, getting a commercial driver's license, because these big commercial vehicles don't get driven just by robots, at least not yet. So you're going to have somebody that knows how to sit behind a wheel of a 26,000-pound vehicle with a bunch of packages in the back of that trailer that knows how to move that vehicle from place to place. And that takes a particular type of education and skill set, one that wasn't necessarily as prevalent pre-pandemic.
Right. Yeah, I agree with all of that. There's a lot in there. I think that technology, both in the physical infrastructure realm and also like in our everyday lives and what we're doing and how we're learning about, what is happening in the future is, that's going to be becoming more and more relevant, and it's already shifting. It seems like there's a mass exodus of cities, like you said, and these abandoned office buildings, abandoned shops, like storefronts, all sorts of abandoned apartment buildings too, I think, depending on where you're at. And this is a shift that I think is going to last for a long time and have a major impact on the world and, how we see it. Yeah.
It's going to be a big thing. And when we talk about these shifts, and again, we're going to go back to maybe a little bit more geopolitics, but I think many of the protests that we've seen, that was really the ingredients for not only our podcast, but much of what's happened around the world. We're going to continue to see protests. We're going to continue to see Black Lives Matter protests.
Yes.
We're going to see the fires being stoked between Palestine and Israel. We're going to see China and the Uyghurs and what's going to happen with them. We're going to see the continued rubber duck revolution in Thailand versus the monarchy. We're going to see India and their continued strike. They're a little more than a month in. What's Narendra Modi going to do? Is he going to capitulate to these farmers and striking workers' demands? Or is he going to dig his heels in and create an entire situation where he has 250 million people that are willing to sit out until they get the rights that they richly deserve? What's going to happen? That should be an interesting development to 2021. What about Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines and his craziness? He's shooting people and killing them before he gives them a fair trial. He's banning nurses from working overseas. So Duterte is going to be an interesting case study. What about Jair Bolsonaro and Brazil and his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and the complete destruction of the Brazilian economy. What's going to happen there? Now, again, last year you had 5 countries that completely had a change in government. You had Algeria, Bolivia, Iraq, Lebanon, and Sudan. And 5 other countries were like, yo, you know what? Okay, these protests are a little bit much. We need to change the way we're moving about. France, we've talked about France a bunch. Hong Kong, they've had some concessions with the people protesting in the streets. Chile, we already know what happened there. India and their anti-Muslim laws. And again, there were protests taking place earlier this year where Muslims were being mistreated in India. And a bunch of people in India were like, we're not going for this. We're not doing this. And then India decided to change their ways. So we're going to continue to see protests around the world. And again, the Rohingya versus the Myanmar in Burma, Bulgaria, and how they were blaming migrants for the spread of COVID. Turkey, how they were blaming the LGBTQ community for the spread of COVID. Malaysia blamed migrants for the spread of COVID. They caned all the migrants, and then they deported them. We're going to see more of this in some countries in 2021. So it's going to be an interesting year geopolitically.
Absolutely.
I know you had something to. I know you were. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say, but we're running out of time. But I think that the really interesting thing here that I'm gathering is just sort of how reliant on this globalized world we are, yet this pandemic has created a circumstance in which we are so reliant on this one particular technology to be able to educate ourselves and be able to know what is happening outside of our own homes. For those of us who, have a home and can stay in it for the lockdowns that are happening all over the place. And I just wanted to mention before we go, just that censorship and control is a big part of that. So I want to emphasize doing research. And I know we're all, guilty of just sharing stuff without looking at sources, but please just know that Facebook controls all of our communication right now. There's a few few companies that control like basically all of the internet and all of our communication right now. And Facebook is the main one. So be aware of that when you're, everything is censored, everything. So
yeah. Please be careful with that. And not only does big tech have a role in this, but governments also have a role in this. And there are some governments that are willing to censor more than others. Let's take a look at what's happened with Belarus and Lukashenko, and they're still protesting there. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at Viktor Orban in Hungary and how essentially he said, you know what, I'm in charge. We're going to dissolve parliament. And there's a tiny South African nation called Lesotho. Lesotho is completely wrapped inside of South Africa. They've dissolved their parliament. They closed it due to COVID. They were like, we're not doing anything. And the prime minister's like, okay, hey, I'm the man. I'm in charge. Yeah. And Russia with Vladimir Putin. Putin was in power as president for 9 years. Then I forget the guy who was in between. Then Putin became prime minister. Then he's been president again from 2012 on. And now he just had a new referendum that's going to keep him in power until 2036.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
there's lots going on. There's lots to look forward to, and there's also a lot to pay attention to and fight for and against. So, Joe,
Brexit is also
it's another one to keep a watchful eye on. I'm sad we're running out of time because we have so much more to talk about, but we will come at you next week. And we're doing an episode on employment next week. So stay tuned for that. Joe, thank you so much for doing this again. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure's always mine, Miss Wells. And next week, employment, if you got a job or don't have a job, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the different types of unemployed people in the United States. We're going to talk about how many people have lost their jobs. We're going to talk about why having a job is important. Mm-hmm. It gives you a sense of purpose. Or to borrow a French phrase, a raison d'etre, a reason for being. So we're going to talk about all of that next week on the employment episode 31 of the Joe and Kat Chats.
Amazing. Thanks again. And goodbye to everyone who tuned in live. Thanks.
Peace. We got to go.
Bye.
Bye.